If you've just fallen in love with quilling and want to give it a try before you buy anything at all, then I've made this video just for you. All you need is a craft knife, metal ruler, some ruled paper, a round toothpick, some glue, and a plastic yogurt lid or gift card or something like that that you can pour your glue onto. So let's start by cutting your quilling strips. Let's take off these red margins so we can get rid of those lines out of the way. And then we turn the paper on its side and just start cutting along those lines. And then you'll end up with strips like that. Now, if you don't have any ruled paper, you can visit my blog and download a template where you can print the lines onto your sheet, say a colored sheet of paper or something thicker than this, and do the same thing. Just cut along those guidelines that I have and you'll come up with strips just like this. This is a sheet that you can download from my blog. I'll leave a link in the show notes below. And you could just follow along and start filling up these boxes with your own examples of some basic quilled shapes. So let's get started with the quilling. I'm going to take one of the strips, and what I've done with my round toothpick is there's this sort of indentation here for the toothpick as a decorative thing, and I've just basically taken some scissors and lopped off that part just so I have a smooth part of the round toothpick here. So if you happen to have a decorative one like this, just take care of that and you'll have smoother strips. You don't want to start quilling on this side because it tapers, and what that's going to do is make your coils kind of tornado. So we want to have them straight. So what I'm going to do is put the strip end on my finger and just start with the friction of, like, say if you had dried glue on your fingers and you need to rub that off, that's the kind of friction that I'm using right here. So against my thumb and my index finger, I'm just rubbing that strip up around the toothpick. So I'm not twirling the toothpick at all. I'm just kind of raveling the paper up against the toothpick. And as it comes down to my knuckle, I'm not lifting it up off my finger. I'm just dragging it along to the fingertip again. And as I go, I'm trying to keep these edges even on the top and the bottom. So I don't want to start swaying up or down. I want to try to be as even as I can. And it will happen, and you can use your other finger to help guide those edges along if you wish. You want to keep it as straight as you can because when you go to glue it to your work surface, you want the edges to glue down to your surface evenly. So now that we've rolled it up, I'm going to let it go and just look what happened. That is what we call a loose scroll. The next one here is called a C-Scroll. And just like the letter C, what I'm going to do is what we did for the loose scroll is start coiling that sheet up just like before to about midway. And then let that go. Whoops, you don't want to do what I just did, folks. Do you see this? This is a tornado. You don't want to do that. Actually, use your finger to push the coil off your toothpick. Sometimes the wood actually has a bit of grip on the paper. So that's half the strip. I'm going to turn it around and coil from this side. And again, I'm going to use this finger and push it off the toothpick. And I just squished it a little bit, but it's not a big deal to re-roll that up. What we have there is the C-Scroll. Now let's work on the next one. The letter S-Scroll. So I'm going to coil on one end down about midway. I'm going to let that unravel and push it off the toothpick. Now when I turn it to do the other side, I'm not going to start coiling on this same side. I want to flip it over and actually start coiling from the opposite side. And as you can guess, from there it's going to form the letter S. Now, what's cool about the letter S, it's one of my favorites, is if you coil one side smaller and one side larger, it actually makes what they call the asymmetric scroll. So it just makes it, uneven. So this one here, the letter C, I've made them quite even, but it's actually very easy to uncoil it a little bit, recoil it slightly, and you see how it's more open like that? So I'm just going to tease it open a little bit and then recoil it. So what I'm going to do is let one coil be larger than the other. So all of a sudden, look how dynamic that looks. So now you can see how you can play with those shapes and just change them up as you need. Now the V-scroll is very simple. We just fold the strip in half. And with the letter V, what I'm going to do is make the coils go outward. So I'm just going to go close to that fold, let it go, push it off. There's one half, let's do the other half. There we go. There is the V-scroll. Now, the Y-scroll is very similar to the V-scroll. So basically, just create the V-scroll yet again. What we're going to do is just dab a little bit of glue inside that straight area. Now, what I have here is like a fancy little shot glass, and I have a fine tip glue bottle here. You don't need to get this. You would just, use the yogurt lid that I had mentioned and just put a spot of glue there and take your toothpick and just take a little amount and just basically smear it along the inner part of that V-scroll. And bring those two straight sides together. So what that does is it then becomes like the letter Y. And what you can do from there is actually start to manipulate that in other ways. You can actually add a little bit of a roll to it like this. And look how fun that's become. It's like a little sprig. Next up is the same-sided scroll. So what I'm going to do is take the paper and actually fold it, one's a little longer than the other, and you don't need to be mathematical about this at all because no one's going to measure you, okay? So what I'm going to do is coil up one end here. And do you see how the coil is facing in this direction? I want this one to obviously, hence the name, same-sided scroll, go in the same direction. Isn't that quite fun? Now the heart scroll, guess what? You've already done this because if you took the V scroll and you've just flipped it around, look at that, instant. Now of course you could have just made that on your own by folding it in half and coiling the two coils inward, right? Same diff. I'm just pointing out that you've actually already done all this work. Now for the asymmetric heart scroll, It's similar to these guys in that one coil is larger than the other. So, but what to create that, you still need to give it like one side a little bit longer than the other. So, but in the case of, say, the same side of scroll, they're going in the same direction, we want the Asymmetric Heart Scroll to have one side smaller and one side larger. And it just gives, so this is the typical way of coiling for quilling, and I find it rather tight. So what I tend to do is actually uncoil it a little bit and re-ravel it by hand. And see how that's more open and dynamic? So that's just my personal take on it, but I just find that it makes for very dynamic shapes. So if you were to put now a little spot of glue right here where those two halves meet, so you see how little glue I'm using? That's the amount that you want, because if you use too much, it's going to take a lot longer for it to dry. So now I've made those two touch, and I'm going to put it down to my work surface and just gently, you know, pat it flat so that those edges line up. What are the differences between scrolls and coils? Well, the end is glued down. So let me just show you what that means. So the loose scroll, I basically didn't glue down this end right here. So, and as typical, this is like a tighter kind of weave to it. So I'm just going to loosen it up just a little bit and recoil that just a bit by hand, just so you can see how those coils all look. And then I'm going to add a spot of glue. So now that I've glued that loose scroll down, like the end down, now what it's called is a loose coil. So the coils are, they've got the ends glued. So what is a tight coil? Well, a tight coil is basically, as the name sounds, it's pretty tight. So instead of, like all these other times, you've let it go, what we want to do this time is actually glue the end down before we even take it off the toothpick. Because what we want is basically a tight coil. So that there is a tight coil. Now, what's a teardrop? Well, let's make a loose coil first. I'm going to let it go. I'm going to glue that end down. And then where that seam is, generally I tend to want to hide it. So what I'm going to do is pinch right on that seam. And what that does is, now I've created a little teardrop shape. So Marquise or I, there's two ways of saying it, you know, whatever. Here's another loose coil I've already made, and there's the seam line, so I'm going to hide it. So I'm just going to pinch on both sides. And that is the Marquise. So I hope you see that it's actually really simple to make quite a few basic shapes. You didn't need a lot of fancy tools. You can certainly dive right in and get a sense of what it's like to start quilling. There's no need for you to wait. It's just paper. There's not that much to invest in it, and this gives you a chance to dabble. I hope you've enjoyed making some basic shapes with me, and that you've fallen in love with quilling all over again and seen how easy it is to make your own wonderful cards and gifts for loved ones. And of all the crafts that I've done in the years, I'd have to say quilling is actually the cheapest by far, because I have so many hours of play with so few expensive tools. Now, what can you do with all these basic shapes? Well, I can imagine this as polka dots on a birthday card, This is easily for a Mother's Day card that I've made. If you put 4 hearts together, can you see a little shamrock here, wishing someone good luck? And you just put a little squiggle here for the stem. Your quilling is only limited by your imagination. And why do I like quilling so much? This is actually a card that I made for a doctor who took care of my father-in-law when he was in ICU. And this is not something that you can buy in a store. This was, for me, a way to convey something so personal, to thank that doctor for the care that he gave. So hopefully your imagination will let you express what you want to say in your heart. So if you do find that you enjoy quilling, instead of having to cut these strips, and actually I have to say it's a little thin, so if you do want to invest in some quilling items, this is only a few dollars, and you look at all the colors you got, they're already pre-cut for you, and so this is not that expensive to buy. Now, instead of a toothpick, this is wood, so it did kind of grip my paper a bit. It had a bit of friction. These are metal tools, so the paper just slides right off of them. The two typical kinds that you'll find is, one is called slotted, so there's a little slot right here that you can slip the paper into. Some people call this a beginner tool. I actually have a problem with that name because, I actually have taught many people with the toothpick and they were just fine. But anyway, they slot the paper into that little groove and start coiling. So as you coil, you can use your fingers to keep them all even, and it's easier on your hand than a toothpick. You're not going to get as tired as easily. And I would have to say that your coils are going to be more even. And if you wanted to do it with a slotted tool, it's not that much more different. And what is the difference other than the fact that one has a slot and the other doesn't? And that is when you look inside that innermost circle, this one is smooth, that one has a crimp. That's mainly the difference. And this one's labeled beginner and this one not. And generally speaking, I would say that my tension of my coils are tighter on using this tool rather than this one. So it's all personal preference, but these are, again, just a few dollars. Now, if you really want to splurge a bit more, I actually enjoy using these tools, which are this is like a fine tip tweezer, and this is what they call a reverse grip tweezer. So when you let go, it actually, holds something. So if I want to hold that glue join together until it dries, I'll actually clamp it like that and turn it upside down and let it hold there until it's dry, and I come back. It's like, oh, look, thanks for holding that for me. Now, as for the glue, this is actually my favorite glue because it's so thick. You can use school children's glue, but I actually can't handle using that because it's too thin. I find it too watery. It takes a while to dry, and I find it can, if you apply too much, it can even warp your paper. So you can buy a smaller bottle at Michael's, or I've even seen it at Walmart. Again, just a few dollars. But you know what? I gotta say, every time someone falls in love with quilling, this is actually what I suggest that they get. This is my first quilling book, and I have referred to it so often. It actually comes with paper, glue, this quilling tool, and all these wonderful instructions for boys and girls. And well, hey, I was an adult when I found this, and I loved it. It is still my favorite book to recommend to people. They have so many examples of projects for so many different occasions. So this is actually my favorite recommendation. I'll leave a link down below. It's going to be an Amazon affiliate link, so I will earn a few pennies if you buy it, and it's no extra cost to you. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed your crash course in quilling, and I hope you fall in love with it just as I have. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll give it 2 thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe so you'll be notified of new videos.